Ellie Hasty waited by the car while her mother put her shoulder into the door of their new home. It was semi-detached, right at the end of the street before the path abruptly stopped and the forest began. The house on the other side was dark, with a broken upstairs window and overgrown garden. Presumably empty, which would make sense why they were getting such a good deal. It didn't look like the kind of run-down areas they had lived in previously, hopping around England to avoid debt collectors and violent ex-stepdads, but Ellie could tell it was run down. As they had driven into Avis, they commented on the extravagant Halloween decorations adorning roofs and gates and even cars. Little handmade totems hanging from car mirrors and in doorways, but then they took a left and then another left, and the celebrations gradually faded to a stop as they rolled into their road. "Almost got it," her mum called from the door, throwing a smile and a wave towards Ellie, who was mentally preparing for another night in the car. Somehow their new homes often came with keys that didn't work, or unexpected housemates. She would have been surprised if this was any different. Suddenly the door gave up and burst open, revealing a not too pleasant hallway, littered with cobwebs and ominous scurrying sounds. Ellie got the bags from the boot, and met her mother in the kitchen. "What's that smell?" she asked, setting their things down on a dirty tile floor. "I think the fridge. Old refrigerators always stink." "How long has this place been empty?" Ellie asked reluctantly, not sure she really wanted to know. "Oh, I'm sure it's not empty," laughed her mum. "Probably a few spiders in your room." "If not rats," Ellie replied with a smile, trying to be light-hearted. She looked out of the kitchen window towards the back garden, and wondered why the earth had been disturbed sporadically, creating little golf ball-sized holes across the entire lawn. She wasn't likely to spend much time in the garden, so what did it matter, she supposed. Curiosity killed the cat, she reminded herself. Mind your business, she continued. "So what do you think?" I think this place is a ghost town. I think this house is haunted, and I think Michael Myers might be hanging out in the woods that our new haunted house backs onto. So it's a hit?" "Absolutely," Ellie laughed. "At least we won't get any trick-or-treaters," she added. "We might have to trick-or-treat ourselves if we wanted dinner tonight," said her mum. Opening the fridge and releasing not only the foulest smell they had ever encountered, but also a live cat that promptly escaped and shot towards the door. "Jesus Christ," said her mother, holding her chest. "How long has that been in there?" Ellie quickly closed the fridge door and tried to wave away the smell that lingered in the air. "I think I might be sick," she said. "Smells like dead bodies." "Alright, let's go out for dinner." "We can't afford that." "Not to a restaurant, just get a wimpy burger and some fries to share," cajoled her mother, holding onto Ellie's hips and dancing from side to side, once again trying to lighten the mood of a bad situation. It would soon be dark, and something told Ellie, in her deepest human instincts, that they shouldn't go out after dark, especially on this day. "I've got a bag of pick and mix and some Misty comics, we can make a night of it." "Alright," said her mother, defeated, and they set about unpacking blankets and pillows from the car in an attempt to make their cold, dusty house a home. As Ellie's mum heaved the last box out of the boot and started towards the house, Ellie slammed it shut and turned to see a strange performance at the top of the road. A group, maybe 30 people strong, seemed to float by, carrying what looked to be pumpkins from a distance, but as the sun was waning and casting a lilac hue across the skyline, she could have sworn they were eggs as big as her head. A biting wind carried fallen leaves down the street towards her, and Ellie felt chased back into the house, where she closed the door before an abrupt knocking nearly scared her out of her wits. "Who could that be?" asked her mum, to which Ellie silently shook her head. "Well, open it." "I don't want to," replied the girl whose gut had thoroughly informed her by this point that something was amiss in Avis, dangerously amiss. "Don't be silly," said her mum, pushing her to the side and opening the door to reveal Madonna and James Dean. "Well, don't you two look a picture," her mother greeted them. "I'm afraid we don't have any sweets for you." "We're not trick-or-treaters," replied Madonna, with an air of someone who had just been insulted. "We're here for the new kid. Heard she's starting school tomorrow," said James Dean, barely passing as a star in a red leather jacket, his scrawny teenage body ruining the aesthetic. "Oh, lovely," said her mother, a deep betrayal. "I can't, remember. We've got plans," Ellie mumbled, and tried to convey in her eyes that she'd like nothing less than to spend Halloween with these strangers. "Pick and mix and a comic aren't plans, darling. I'll be alright, you go make friends." "We've just moved in. We've got bags to—" The door slammed unceremoniously in their faces, and Ellie turned to her new friends, realizing her fate had been well and truly sealed. "So," she said. The sun had begun to dip behind the house, casting the shadows of the three teens, stretched long across the street to the opposite row of houses, similarly deserted and decrepit. "Shall we go then?" she asked, and took 2 steps towards the street. "Not that way," said Madonna, as she walked backwards into the quickly darkening forest. "We've got an initiation for you," said James Dean, taking her arm and leading the way. Wait a minute," she said, breaking free of his grip and causing Madonna to stop in her tracks. "I'd rather not." "See, Boy George, she's not worth the hassle," said James Dean, and Madonna wasted no time in kicking his shin. "I'm Madonna, you loser," she spat, her upper lip curling in distaste towards the boy. "And you know the rules. Everyone gets the tour. Everyone gets a chance." "Not when they arrive on Halloween night. That's different. She's slowing us down. It's getting dark already. Then pick up the pace." They started to walk again, holding Ellie's arms on either side, and she let herself be carried. She was confused more than anything. Her mind was telling her to run screaming back to her mother, but her gut, the same gut that had been screaming danger since they arrived in Avis, now told her to follow. They walked for at least another 15 minutes, until the sun was truly set and the light from Ellie's house was nowhere to be seen. She wasn't even sure which direction she would choose if for some reason she did need to make a run for it. "There it is," said Madonna, and they slowed to a creep as they approached 3 distinct trees, clearly much older than anything else in the forest. They were yews, she thought, or perhaps willows. She didn't know much about trees, but she knew something about graveyards, and she was instantly sure that was where they were. Each tree was surrounded by lit pumpkins, handmade trinkets and plastic toys, perhaps from cereal boxes. There were packets of sweets, cheap costume jewellery, and 100, maybe 200 tiny mounds of disturbed earth, so many that Madonna struggled to find a place to crouch down and begin to dig. Meanwhile, James Dean watched the forest with quick, darting eyes. Every few seconds he would shiver, then shrug one shoulder and shake his head a little, regaining his composure before repeating the whole process. "What are we doing?" said Ellie in a broken whisper. "What is this?" "An offering," he said, without turning to Ellie. "Is it a grave?" she asked. "Did someone die here?" "Many people died here," replied Madonna from the ground, her dirtied hands reaching into her jacket pockets and revealing 3 cloth dolls, all rather childishly made with patchy sewing, reasonably nondescript besides their differing hair colour. "I made them quick, but they look all right," she said, holding them up to the light of the jack-o'-lanterns and admiring her work. "Who died here?" asked Ellie, before a loud crack from the forest made everyone jump with fright, then freeze and wait, listening for more sounds. Nothing. Not even birds. "Everyone. Back when the town wasn't Avis. Before it was Avis, it was Lockford, and everybody drowned," whispered Madonna. "They tried to get to higher ground, but the tree line was sewn together with creeping vines," added James Dean. "The children climbed the trees and watched their families sink below the surface." "Stop it," said Ellie, now sure someone or something from deep in the forest was watching them. "We have to walk back through the forest," she thought. "We have to leave the light and walk in the darkness again. It isn't funny. Just because I'm new, I can go to the library and see that you're lying." All 3 children looked towards the vast darkness of the forest as they spoke. No one dared tear their eyes away. Madonna craned her neck over her shoulder as she quickly buried the dolls and covered them over with dirt. She stood, brushed her hands off on her rah-rah skirt, then buried them back in her pockets. "Your mum shouldn't have brought you to Avis," she said, not looking at Ellie, looking towards the darkness. "This town is cursed. We leave offerings for old Avis on Halloween so she doesn't eat us in our sleep," she continued, "when the line between the dead and the living is thinnest. On Samhain," added the boy. "I've just given you a free year, new girl. Next time you're on your own." "You're playing a trick," said Ellie, but she inched closer to them and prayed they wouldn't leave her alone there. "There's a museum. You can even touch the stake they burned her on." "Burned who?" "All right, let's go." The boy grasped Ellie's upper arm and began to stomp confidently back towards her house. Ellie pulled her arm back and opened her mouth to question further, or to protest, but she knew her mistake immediately. Another twig snapped in the distance ahead of them, then a little closer to their left and even closer to their right. The 3 teenagers huddled together and looked all around, but it was too dark now to see anything besides the pumpkin offerings. "I told you we should have come earlier," hissed the boy. Madonna squinted her eyes to see better into the distance before something rushed upon their group. It was something, that was all they could say. Their hearts jumped up into their throats and they fled, in opposite directions, into the night. Ellie hit a tree, then turned to run blindly until she hit another. Her hands and face were cut and bleeding from thorns and broken branches. Perhaps she could have thought clearly and chosen a direction, if not for the screams of her former companions, seemingly coming from every direction. She tripped down an incline and rolled her ankle, landing painfully on hard dirt. Far away from the shining offerings at the base of the 3 trees, there was only the light of the waning moon to see from. She fell silent and listened. No sounds from the woods now, no screams or breaking branches. Suddenly a whimper from close by made her jump and cover her face with her hands. "No," came a voice. The girl dressed as Madonna. She had been huddled a short distance away from Ellie, but was standing now. Ellie stood up too, to announce herself. God forbid she left her in the woods alone. "No, no, 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 no." "What?" asked Ellie, as Madonna tried and failed to climb up out of the shallow hole. I think we're okay. I think they're gone. No. What? It's the dead rats. We're in the dead rats. We were nowhere near the dead rats, she cried, continuing her fruitless climb. They herded us here, she mumbled maniacally, and Ellie joined in her attempt to climb up to the surface. It didn't make sense. The hole was shallow enough to see over the top. They could reach their hands up to the edge, but they couldn't climb over the side. Are we near my house? Asked Ellie, but was ignored by the girl's frantic heaving and heavy breathing. Mum! She yelled, and Madonna turned to look at her. They were close enough now that she could see her face clearly, bloodied, muddy, smeared makeup and teary eyes. Mum! She screamed, and Madonna joined her. Surely someone would hear them. Surely someone would come. They screamed until their lungs burned and they could barely breathe, then stopped suddenly in unison when they heard a reply. What was that? Ellie asked in a whisper. I heard it too. Was it your mum? They listened in silence, panting for air until the sound became clear. Mum! It called from nearby the surface of the hole the locals called the dead rats. Mum! It called again, and this time they heard the shuffling of something circling them. Madonna began to cry, swiveling her head this way and that, looking up, trying to see whatever it was, but Ellie was distracted by the ground. Any light of any use was up. To look down was to become completely blind, but she could feel the ground moving. She stepped back, but Madonna grabbed her wrist and pulled her back into the huddle. Then she too noticed the moving, a sort of rumbling, rolling, moving of the dirt. Suddenly Madonna screamed and pulled away. She was stamping her feet and slapping her thighs frantically. Then something painful, biting and scratching started to climb up Ellie's leg. She kicked it off, but another took its place. Rats! Screamed Madonna. Rats! 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 She screamed. Ellie made a run for the edge, pushed her toes into the muddy walls and through sheer willpower urged herself up until her elbows were over the side. A hand reached out of the darkness and touched her arm, causing her to fall back into the hole. It was the boy. He reached out his hand for the girls, but when Ellie moved to reach back, Madonna stopped her. The ground had fallen still again. The forest had fallen silent. The rats were lying limp around their feet, and the boy blocked out the moon's light so that all she could see was a silhouette. Don't, she whispered. We need to get out of here fast before it comes back, replied Ellie, but Madonna shook her head. The boy didn't speak. He didn't move. He stayed still as a statue, crouched down like an animal with his hand reached out. Ellie tried to see his face, but there was only darkness. Mom, he taunted, wiggling his fingers. What the hell is going on? Anger replaced fear for a brief moment as Ellie questioned how her first night in a new town could so briskly turn to shit. Suddenly a light broke through the darkness and the boy was gone. Something loud and clumsy was moving through the forest, shining a light this way and that. Ellie? It was her mum. Madonna looked at her with wide eyes and shook her head. Don't call out, she said without saying a word. But Ellie was sure of it. She knew her mum's gait. She could always tell who was coming up the stairs, who was in the kitchen. She knew her step, her weight, her balance. Surely a monster couldn't replicate that. Mum, she yelped, and the light of the torch found them. What are you doing down there? She called as she peered over the edge of the hole that now seemed smaller in the light. Get me out, said Madonna, and Ellie's mum reached out to her and heaved her over the side before doing the same for Ellie. As they walked back to the house, huddled into the side of a woman who seemed to radiate with the safety of being an adult, they called out for the boy who Ellie learned was named John. They got back to the house and Ellie's mum offered to drive Madonna home. He probably played a trick and went home, she said. You'll see him at school tomorrow. The girls didn't look at each other in the back seat of the car. They didn't say goodbye when they dropped Madonna off. Ellie never told her mother what had happened in the woods, but both girls knew. Something, that was all they could say it was, something had eaten that night. John's parents reported him missing the next day, but the Whitney Police Department was stretched and underfunded. 12 active missing persons cases at the beginning of the week had promptly turned to 15, then 16. The council hired a team to dredge the lakes. It was the only sensible solution to so many people simply disappearing in a town the size of a park in the city. But the equipment was abandoned in the forest, and the team never heard from again. John was never found, but his leather jacket was, on the floor of the dead rats, bloodied and half-eaten. The school sent out a message to parents that children should not go into the woods alone on Halloween night, but they needn't have bothered. No one would be left in Avis by the following year.